Have you ever thought about what racism actually does to your brain? Higher levels of racial discrimination were tied to heightened activation in brain areas. Can we reverse these impacts? Dr. Monnica Williams. She's a licensed clinical psychologist.
Well, nobody had bothered to check to see if these instruments even worked in people of color. I get to my office and I'm dealing with, harassment.
Have you ever thought about what racism actually does to your brain? Could the everyday microaggressions, the racial bias, or systemic inequality you're exposed to be reshaping your neural networks, eroding your emotion regulation, and accelerating brain aging? This isn't just about fleeting discomfort. It's about how repeated experiences of racism and discrimination can embed themselves in your brain, triggering hypervigilance, weakening memory, and leaving an everlasting mark on your mental health. Science is now uncovering just how deep these effects can be. A neuroimaging study of trauma exposed Black women found that higher levels of racial discrimination were tied to heightened activation in brain areas responsible for threat, vigilance, and emotional regulation, suggesting constant strain on these neural systems. Another study revealed that racial discrimination was associated with poor microstructure, less integrity in white matter tracts of the brain, areas important for efficient communication between brain regions. These findings make one point clear: racial trauma isn't just about emotional, it's neurobiological. That's why healing isn't just about talking, it's also about undoing real changes in the brain. And the big question is, can we reverse these impacts before they become permanent? That's why I'm honored to speak today with one of the foremost experts on how racism actually literally gets under the skin and into the brain. Welcome to another powerful episode of Khan Clinics. I'm your host, Dr. Amir Khan, and today we're honored to have an exceptional guest who's a leading expert in racial trauma, cultural competence, and mental health equity. A true trailblazer in psychology and therapy, Dr. Monnica Williams. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and professor at the University of Ottawa, where she holds the Canadian Research Chair in Mental Health Innovation. She leads the Laboratory for Culture and Mental Health Disparities, advancing culturally informed therapies and reducing mental health inequities. Dr. Williams has published over 200 scientific peer reviewed articles on racial trauma, OCD, and cultural competence in care. She's authored several influential books, such as Healing Racial Trauma, a 12-session protocol, Power and Privilege, Discrimination in Individual and Institutions. She also directs the Behavioral Wellness Clinic in Connecticut and Ottawa, offering evidence based treatment and pioneering therapies like MDMA and ketamine. A global thought leader, she serves on multiple editorial boards, advises the International OCD Foundation, and co founded its Diversity Council. Dr. Williams has also featured in outlets CNN, New York Times, PBS, NPR. Dr. Williams, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here.
Well, let's start by saying your personal experience. What was the turning point in your life that made you say, well, this is a very important piece of work. I need to focus on mental health and I want to see what is it doing to people of different races, and hence come up with the definition racial trauma.
Yeah, that's a Really good question. When I started graduate school, when I decided I wanted a career in psychology, I was actually interested in studying OCD that you mentioned, and I'm still very involved in OCD research, and I'm part of the International OCD Foundation. But when I went to grad school to study OCD, I discovered that a lot of the measures that we use to assess OCD, to look at change, to look at it from a research perspective and clinical perspective, were racially biased, and that we weren't getting the same responses from people of color as we were from white people. Nobody had bothered to check to see if these instruments even worked in people of color. And so that left the question like, wow, my community, whole communities are potentially being misdiagnosed, understudied, over pathologized because we haven't even done the basic footwork to see that the instruments we're using are effective across groups. So that was the first hint that I had that, maybe this is an area we need to look at more. But what really made me interested in racial trauma was early in my career. After I had graduated and done my internship, I had my first job at the University of Pennsylvania in the medical school, where I was working in the Center for the Treatment and Study of Anxiety. And I had a client with PTSD, and she got in PTSD from discrimination in her workplace. And I was still a junior psychologist, and I was attending, weekly supervision meetings and trainings around how to treat PTSD. And we had a world class team of leaders in how to treat it. But those, supervisors, they didn't really understand it.
So that was your turning point. You came about using the word, you just used it in your sentence about racial trauma. How would you
Yes.
define, Dr. Williams, explain how would you define that term? When does when does exposure becomes hits, insult, and then it becomes later on a traumatic experience or traumatic event? How would you
Right.
classify or categorize it?
Right. Well, I would say, I would say every person of color, in America or in Western culture is experiencing some level of racial stress because
Mhm.
discrimination, it's all around us. It's ubiquitous. It's in the air we breathe. It's in the water we drink. And so all of us have a certain amount of stress from it. But when you have enough stress that it tips over from being simply a nuisance or annoying to traumatic. That's when we say you have racial trauma, that it accumulates to the point where we lose our ability to function as we normally did. And we may find that we are suffering from anxiety or depression or intrusive memories. I mean, I've had periods myself where I felt like, oh my gosh, I studied this thing and now I'm feeling it. I'm feeling racial trauma. I remember one work experience where I was experiencing so much harassment that I was afraid. I was feeling anxious just driving to work every morning. Like my knuckles on the steering wheel, and I'm feeling my blood pressure rising as I'm like approaching the parking lot. And it was this was in Kentucky, and even just walking from the parking lot to my office, I'm walking by Confederate monuments, right? And then I get to my office and I'm dealing with harassment from people in offices higher than myself. So it was all accumulating, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have racial trauma. you know
Excellent. Thank you for explaining that. But would you consider, Dr. Williams, there's stress in everyone's life. You know when stress crosses the line and becomes something harmful to your mental health. You want to keep a distinction between stress and and when it starts affecting your mental abilities. In the mix of it, you're identifying, could this stress be related to racial aspects of how you're functioning? And you just described, hey, this for people of color is a normal thing. What would you suggest? How do we identify, oh, now this is becoming an issue and we should try to seek some help?
Right. Well, I would say, if you notice changes, like if you notice you're feeling more anxious, like you're anxious to go to work, or if you're feeling depressed and sad for long periods of time and it doesn't just, you can't just shake it off. Or if you find yourself like calling in sick, to work because you can't deal with, coworkers who are maybe making unkind remarks, but it's gotten to the point where it's more than you can just shake it off. um, I would say those are some good signs. Also, sometimes people find unhealthy ways of coping with these things, with substances or food or distractions that end up not being healthy, right? So if people are engaged in those sorts of things, I'd say, yeah, this is probably a time for you to step back and think, what do I need to do to address this problem that's become traumatic for me?
What a remarkable journey we've just experienced together. The path to health isn't always straight, but it's always worth the effort. I hope today's conversation inspired you to take the next step in your wellness journey, armed with new knowledge and a fresh perspective. If today's episode left you inspired, share it with people, someone who need to hear this. Give us a thumbs up and your opinion. Keep exploring, keep evolving, and we'll see you in the next episode of Khan Klinics.